Hello everyone and welcome to another game review for TechPowerUp. Today I will be reviewing a game called Warhammer 40k Mechanicus, which is by a studio called Bulwark Studios, who I have never heard of. They have made one other game prior to this, I don't remember the name of it. So they've got sort of no history, and to my absolute surprise, the game that they've brought out from the Games Workshop IP is actually very good. Now, if you look back to the sort of history of Games Workshop issuing out their IP to just about anyone they can extract money from, a lot of their games have been pretty hit and miss for the last few years. I think the last decent game that they released was probably sort of Warhammer Space Marine, which was a fair while back. But no, they licensed out their IP to Bulwark Studios, and what a awesome bet that was. The game itself is probably one of the best Warhammer games ever to sort of hit the PC screen. I genuinely think this one has got some legs to stay for a while. It's very simplistic, but it's sort of they've put all the emphasis in very much the right places. The nice thing about this game is that I think it caters towards sort of people who love turn-based strategies, and B, it also caters towards the kind of people who really enjoy Warhammer lore and like the Warhammer games to sort of to stick to the lore quite closely. And this does both of those things in equal parts, and just sort of not in an overcomplicated way, but just bang on. Like, this game is just sort of, I wouldn't say perfection. There are a few issues here and there, but you know, this is probably one of the best stabs at the IP that I've seen to date. There is sort of a lot of inspiration, I would say, from XCOM. I wouldn't say it is as good as XCOM, but it is certainly close. Like, it's as close as you're going to get without being the same in name, basically. So it's a typical turn-based strategy, a lot of similarities to XCOM, like having your named units and whatnot, although it is sort of what I would say slightly easier compared to XCOM, almost too easy, which is my only negative point, which I'll get to in a bit. So there's your generic dungeon crawling, which is sort of like going through a map and going through some sort of randomly generated options, which will sort of take HP off units, give HP to units, give you resources, or increase the enemy's initiative for the rest of that particular round. So sort of a little bit of dungeon crawling mixed in between the battles in the overarching missions, a little bit of battles, and tons and tons and tons of customization for your main characters, which in this case are all tech priests. There's plenty of room to grow attached to them because they're sort of your own little concoctions, and there's quite a bit of diversity between all of them. And it's not just the tech priests that are sort of have all of this diversity, but it's your friendly and enemy units in the entire game as well, which sort of have this nice sort of varied spread of specialities, and they all feel very concise, and sort of each unit has its own thing that it's good at, and you know it, and it's just very perfectly executed in that way. Even like the most basic units from the enemy still feel powerful despite the fact that they're the enemy's most basic units. I remember in the tutorial that, you know, those basic units absolutely hammer you, and it's enough to make you sort of feel visually like they're imposing, but unfortunately, because of the difficulty curve sort of not being in existence whatsoever, they're sort of imposing in physicality only. In terms of my main criticisms for the game is, yes, it was probably too easy. I have heard a few people sort of saying this, and I have to echo it. Even the missions labelled as hard initially sort of present a challenge visually by putting you against big, scary sort of named opponent units. But when you sort of play through the game, you sort of get to the idea that you are actually quite overpowered. I don't know whether this is sort of the kind of thing you can correct by making the enemies harder, or by making your own units a little bit weaker by hitting them with a nerf bat or something, but certainly bullet sponging enemies is not the way to go, because that's just a sort of a cheap cop-out. But yeah, the whole game can sort of fundamentally be beaten with brute force and just sort of massively out-teching your opponents, and sort of I found myself completely overpowering the enemy by sort of a third of the way through the game. So yeah, it is a little bit too easy. I mean, for those of you looking for a casual experience, I mean, this entire game can be played with just a mouse. You don't have to use your keyboard at all, as far as I can tell, other than to shimmy the camera around. But yeah, it's a little bit easy So some sort of casual players just wanting to be told a story and sort of play through a game nice and easily will enjoy that part, but for the most part the game, I would say, is a little bit too easy. What makes it easy? Well, partially down to the upgrade trees, which are all really cool themselves. Personally, I wouldn't change that because the upgrades and the customization and the weapons and the items and just all of the modifications you do to your characters are awesome. And it's part of what makes the game sort of so addictive and so well balanced. And that's sort of what makes XCOM so cool. It's all that customization and sort of modifying weapons and getting new weapons unlocked and whatnot. But the thing with the sort of fundamental battle feature in the game, which sort of takes up about half of actual gameplay, if not 2/3 of the actual gameplay, is that it's completely open-ended. So in normal games, in turn-based strategies, you'll have, and even in the actual Warhammer tabletop game, you've got your movement phase, and then you've got your shooting phase, and then you've got your melee phase, and a psychic phase, and like an end phase, and so on and so forth. And there's sort of strict rules, and it goes in that order. So like in XCOM, you can move once and then shoot, or you can move once and then move twice, but you can't shoot, but you can hunker down. That sort of thing. There's usually like a clear sort of array of things you need to go through before you can get places. Whereas in this game, it's kind of cool, but I feel like it's part of what makes the game too easy, is you can do anything at any time. So if you want to, you can shoot a gun at the start of the turn, then you can move twice. Then if you've got command points to spare, you can move again. Then you can shoot another gun if your unit's got it. You can then use an ability, and then you can move if you've got another command point to spare, and then hit a unit with a melee weapon. And at first I was thinking, wow, this is really open-ended. This sort of makes things a hell of a lot more interesting, opens up a wide variety of options, gives me some new sort of strategic options in battle. But then I start to realise this is the problem. This is what makes the game too easy. By enabling me to do all of these things and not giving me a sort of structured battle round feature, it sort of made it just ridiculously easy. And so I think that's probably the only way to make the game more challenging, but at the same time might kind of ruin the game for what it is. So yeah, I mean, that is literally my only criticism, and a game being too easy is probably one of the most pitiful criticisms you've ever heard, but I mean, it's there. Another minor criticism is cover system features heavily in all Warhammer games, even in features in XCOM, and this doesn't have it. I don't know whether it's a necessity. It's a very minor thing, but it would have been a sort of a nice addition and a nicer way to make things a bit more tactical, and possibly a way to make that difficulty curve a little bit more existent, if you will. The only other issue was in the video options department, which was the when you're in full screen. I don't know whether this is just for G-Sync monitors like mine or not, but in full screen you get locked at 40 Hz. You can't seem to change to 60 or 75 or whatever the refresh rate is for your monitor natively. If you change it to that, it just ignores you and carries on at 40 Hz. And V-Sync can't be turned off or on in full screen either. So basically you're forced to have your refresh rate set to the max refresh rate of your monitor, so 60, 75, 122, whatever, in the menus, and you're forced at 40 Hz refresh rate in battle, which is just ridiculous. Like, this is the most preposterous thing I think I've ever seen in a video options menu not functioning properly at all. So in order to get around that, you have to play in windowed mode. There is no windowed full screen mode, so that makes it even more awkward, because you have that white bar across the top, and you'll have a cutoff at the bottom, and your start menu will cover over the bottom as well, unless you unlock it and shift it over to the side. So yeah, that's massively irritating, and I'm hoping it will be fixed soon. It wasn't fixed in one of the most recent patches, 1.0.4, so hopefully it will get fixed eventually, but it didn't affect my gameplay too much, in fairness. But what it lacks in challenge, it makes up in just about every other department. You can accept missions in any order. You can kit out your tech priests in more ways than I can possibly count. All the enemies feel extremely well designed. Like I said, even the simple Necron warriors are really, really sort of quite punchy and cool. You can specialize units into ranged or melee combat, put them into a support role. You can even have a guy set up as like a backline dude that just runs around, farms command points and buffs troop units, which was actually quite nice. And none of them felt like they were particularly overpowered or underpowered or anything, and they all had these really awesome specializations that they could go into later in the game. Like, not equipping a melee weapon on a ranged dude gives him way more more buff stats, and he can use these massive weapons that do AoE across the screen, which feels really damn cool. And it's very much sticking to the Warhammer lore of these absurd weapons that are sort of just massively overpowered. There is, like I say, a massive range of items to use, including buffing items, not just melee or ranged weapons. And they have their associated drawbacks. So it does, those different weird weapons and abilities that you can use do make the rounds feel strategic, but unfortunately because it's so open, it can make it feel a little bit too easy again. Even small missions with very little to do with the storyline all add to this sort of doomsday timer warning of the Necron awakening that sort of adds to the tension at the over the whole of the game. So you feel like that you're not just doing these individual missions to sort of go along a chink in a chain for no particular reason. It does all build up to something. And even the boss fights in the game, Christ, they're so good. They are genuinely awesome. The bosses are hard without just being bullet sponges, like I mentioned earlier. They don't just have masses of life points. Yes, some of them do have quite a high life points total, but they have abilities which make them really sort of difficult and interesting to go against. I don't want to spoil anything for you, but like one of them just involved swapping himself out with a lot of units every time you felt like you got him cornered, and it genuinely felt interesting. Unfortunately, they were the hardest missions, and they were still not particularly hard. But it was nice to see boss battles that had been very sort of carefully thought out. The levels are nice and diverse. Like I said, there's a lot of randomly generated instances in between each level. It's a very, very addictive game. Like, I can't count how many hours I've lost to this game. I found myself playing it a hell of a lot more than I usually devote to review games. Loads of customization. And yeah, it seemed really good for short casual sessions. Do be aware that there is an autosave feature, but it doesn't autosave when you finish a mission. So be sure to save frequently. But like I said, it's excellent for sort of, I've got 10 minutes spare. I'm just going to jump in a battle, shoot some Necrons up, and then head to work in the morning. It is ideal for that sort of thing. So I feel like I've probably spent a long time complaining about the sort of difficulty being too easy, but overall, honestly, the game is fantastic. Like I say, near XCOM quality, graphics are fantastic, performance is sort of absolutely fine for what it is. Just a few issues with the video settings and the difficulty level, but if those things don't bother you, or even if they only minorly bother you, I would strongly recommend you to give the game a go if you're a Warhammer fan, particularly a Mechanicus fan, because even in those regards it's bang on with the Adeptus Mechanicus. So yeah, overall really enjoyed my time with this game. Don't focus too heavily on the minor negatives, because honestly they just didn't get in the way for me, but I felt like I needed to point them out. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this review. You can see the link below if you want to check out the full written review as well as the performance analysis, and I will most definitely have a review for you guys next week, coming out on Monday. The embargo drops at 12 p.m. CET time, so yeah, look out for that, and yeah, I'll see you guys next week.